So this is an analysis level TBS, which means I have to be able to use the information to identify patterns and relationships. So as always with the TBS, the first step is to scan the TBS. Now I'm looking at this TBS, the first thing I see is an exhibit. Now note for future information, when a TBS has exhibits, they will always appear at the top. And a TBS can have more than one exhibit. In fact, the more complex TBSs could have 8 exhibits. So be forewarned. Next, I see that we're talking about analytical procedures being performed. And if I continue to scroll down, I see that I'm going to need to compute an estimate for different expense accounts based on the exhibit information and the additional notes. So the 1, 2, 3 tells me that I'm going to need to enter a number. Then if I open the exhibit has year 1 and year 2 numbers plus some additional notes at the bottom. So now I'm ready for a more detailed review. TQ is a calendar year corporation, and the auditors are looking at payroll-related expenses for year 2. Specifically, the auditors are performing substantive analytical procedures which require development of an estimate that can be compared to the client's number. They've also established materiality at 5% of the year 2 account balance. And then the usual instructions are present. I'm going to be entering my number, my auditor estimate. The numbers that I enter need to be rounded to the nearest dollar, and each situation is independent. If I look at the exhibit, I see that the exhibit has year 2 and year 1 numbers, mostly for the payroll-related accounts plus sales revenue. The information at the bottom provides unit sales information for year 1 and year 2. Now, just for your information, the year 1 numbers are audited, and the year 2 numbers are the client numbers that we are auditing. How many items are there? There appear to be 6. And which ones look harder or easier? So the easier ones, or the easiest ones, look like bonus expense and short-term disability expense, because the estimate seems pretty straightforward without any complications like mid-year changes. The harder ones have more information and more complications, like hourly payroll expense, which has increases in the FUTA tax rate and in payroll. You don't need to start at the beginning and do them in order. If you want to start with one that's easier, that's okay. Just check to make sure you've tackled all of them before you leave the TBS. Okay, let's go ahead and tackle one of these. Bonus expense doesn't look too difficult. The notes say bonus expense for year 2 is expected to be 7% of total prior year wage and salary expense. Now, note that the estimate is based on prior year expense, so that means year 1 numbers. What is total prior year or year 1 wage and salary expense? For that, I need to look at the exhibit. So I'm going to need to add $12 million and $4,850,000 in order to get my total. So for that, I'll use the calculator. So I'm going to add 12 million plus 4,850,000, and that gives me 16,850,000. So that is my total prior year salary and wage expense. Now the note said that the bonus was expected to be 7% of the prior year total wage and salary expense. So now I need to multiply by 7%. Going back to the calculator, I'm going to multiply by 0.07, and that gives me 1,179,500. So that's the estimate of the year 2 bonus expense that I'm going to enter into the TBS. Now, I'm going to enter 1,179,500 without commas or dollar signs, because the system automatically formats the number entered, and you can see what the system is receiving under formatted response. So I'll hit accept, and now it has my number. And then one more thing, the system will also reject unacceptable characters. So for example, if you hit X instead of 6, it would not enter X and it would not enter the 6 either. At this point, I would normally be done with this item, but I want to show you how this problem could be expanded to require you to use your estimate to evaluate the client's year 2 number. So remember, the client's year 2 number for bonus expense was $1,315,000. So that was this number here. And we got $1,179,500. If I compare my estimate of $1,179,500 to the client's number of $1,315,000, I get a difference or variance of $135,500. I need to use the absolute value of this number. Now, is this difference significant? For that, I need to compare it to materiality. Materiality was set at 5% of the client's actual year 2 number. When I compare materiality of $65,750 to my variance of $135,500, I have to conclude that the current year number requires further investigation. I can't sign off yet. More work is needed. Let's try another one. How about office salary expense? So the notes indicate that average salaries increased 4% effective July 1st, year 2. Headcount was 40 in year 1 and increased to 48 on July 1, year 2. So the salary increase and the headcount changes occurred July 1 of year 2. Since TQ is a calendar year company, the changes only affect half of the year. Now, how do I come up with the estimate for year 2? Since the changes didn't occur until halfway through year 2, the first half of year 2 should be like the first half of year 1. So I'll start with the year 1 office salary expense and divide by 2. That will give me an estimate for the first half of year 2. So in looking at my numbers, I've got office salary expense for year 1 of $4,850,000, which I need to divide by 2. If I pull in my calculator, I will take $4,850,000, divide by 2, and that gives me $2,425,000. Next, I want to try to estimate the second half of year 2. Now, I remember that the headcount changed on July 1. If I compute an average salary for each person during the first half of the year, I can use that average salary to begin the computations for the second half of the year. So I'm going to divide the half-year amount, the $2,425,000 that I previously calculated, by the headcount in year 1. That will give me the average half-year salary per person. So I'm going to take $2,425,000 and divide by 40, and that gives me an average of $60,625. But there was another change, the mid-year salary increase. So salaries increased mid-year by 4%. So I need to add another 4% to that amount to get my average salary for the second half of the year. So I'm going to multiply the 60,000 by 1.04. So in my calculator, I'll come over here and multiply by 1.04, and that gives me 63,050. So that is my new half-year average amount, which I will multiply by the headcount for the second half of the year, which was 48. So in my calculator, I'll now multiply by 48, and that gives me $3,026,400. So this is my estimate for the second half of the year. So now I need to take my estimate for the first half of the year and my estimate for the second half of the year and add them together to get my total estimate for the year. So in my calculator, I'm going to add 2,425,000, and that gives me an estimate for the entire year of $5,451,400. So that is my year 2 estimate or expectation. So now I need to enter that into the system. So I will enter $5,451,400. Again, I would be done at this point, but let's go ahead and evaluate the number and see if it's any good. Remember, to evaluate, I needed to first calculate the difference between my number and the client's number. My number is $5,451,400. I need to compare that to the client number, and the client number is 5,092,500. When I compare the two numbers, I end up with a variance or difference of 358,900. Then the final step, to evaluate that difference and determine if it's significant, I need to calculate materiality. Materiality, if you'll remember, is 5% of the client's actual number. So I'm going to calculate materiality, which was 5,092,500 times 5%. That gives me materiality of 254,625. When I compare that to my difference is larger. I therefore cannot sign off on the client's number. I'm going to have to do further investigation. At this point, I'm able to go ahead and submit my answers, and I wanted to show you the resources that are available to you. First, there is a discussion of analytical procedures, including the substantive analytical procedures that were performed in this TBS. Then there are detailed explanations for each of the different types of expense. So remember, we did bonus expense and we did the office salary expense. So detailed explanations of the computations that we made are in the explanations. And then finally, if you need additional information, you can click on the link to the chapter, and that will provide far more information about analytical procedures. So a few things to remember from this TBS. Extra information was included on sales dollars and units. It isn't necessary to use all of the information provided. Next, read the information carefully to ensure you're computing the numbers correctly. There may be slightly different versions of this TBS with slightly different numbers. Third, be methodical. Work your way through the information provided and the steps needed. For example, you needed to compute the wage increase for half of the year, not the entire year. Fourth, check your math. The math was pretty easy, but it is also easy to hit the wrong key and make a mistake. And then watch the clock. If you hit 20 minutes, stop and move on to the next TBS. You don't want to run out of time and not be able to even start the next TBS. It could be the easiest one, and you'll miss raking in all of those points.